All right, we are live.
You're live where?
We are live on YouTube, not on the link
Okay,
originally
We're
scheduled.
maybe.
live, we're live somewhere else.
So I wonder if everyone should stop talking and let me start the
Oh,
show. What do you guys think of that?
yes, because I do see us live now somewhere else. Okay.
All right.
I see some people are here too.
Whenever you guys are ready, we can just start the show. How's that? Are we ready, everybody? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective, the show where students of objectivism have discussions, explore topics, and try to apply the ideas of Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism of the day. And today we've got an interesting topic, interesting to me and to much of the world. It's the birthday of famous, influential philosopher Karl Marx, which obviously probably evokes many connotations like communism, etc. And I think in the school of objectivism, we might have even a bit, quite a lot, actually, more context to add to who Marx is, his influences on Marx, as well as the nature of Marx's influence on the world. I'm reminded of when Ayn Rand was giving her interviews, many of which you've probably seen on YouTube, and she says the most evil philosopher or the evil man in history is Immanuel Kant. You know, I could imagine if there was internet in her time, her comment section would be full of people telling her, "What do you mean Kant? Marx is the worst. Stop punching at Kant, Rand. Come on, what's this Kant derangement syndrome you have? We're at war with the Soviet Union and you're worried about Kant? Go after Marx." But I think a more sophisticated view of the whole thing says that Karl Marx is almost like he's like the Hillary Clinton of German philosophers. Plenty evil, plenty vicious, but not the final boss. It's bigger than him, and he's not really running the show, but still plenty evil to contend with. So we're going to explore the topic here today, and I could not think of two better co-hosts. We actually have a former Marxist turned objectivist, and we've also got a financier, hedge fund guy who brands himself as capitalist pig. Good Lord, we're in for a treat. So please welcome former Greek Marxist turned Greek objectivist, Nikos Sotirakopoulos. Hey.
Student of objectivism, because the more you get into it, the more you understand how difficult it is to understand and practice the philosophy. So let's keep it student.
Yeah, I only started thinking of myself as an objectivist after a good 10, 12 years of reading and really thinking about it and really starting to understand what it means. So I do not encourage people to call themselves objectivist overnight. But anyway, I digress. Please, let's welcome a guy who, boy, does he get it. This guy, to him, money, he sees money like Kanye West sees music. You know, it's his universe. Let's welcome Jonathan Hoenig.
Thank you, Rucka. It's definitely part of my universe. And I agree with you, Nikos. I mean, for me, it's this exploration of objectivism isn't a struggle. It's a pleasure, though. It's a joy to keep learning and to keep expanding. I remember at some point, Dr. Peikoff talking about knowledge being a spiral. I mean, and you guys are OAC students, I believe. So you're, real serious students of objectivism. But even for me, as much more of a layman, going back to things that Rand wrote or talked about years ago, whether it's on some of those issues of different philosophers or whatever else. I mean, there's so much to learn and to explore. And, when it comes to Karl Marx, I mean, I studied philosophy in college, never read Das Kapital, but I'm certainly aware of Karl Marx. And what's so fascinating, there's Nikos's copy. What's so fascinating is that even if you have never read Marx or don't even, know who Marx is, you've probably seen the image. I wanted to share, look at some of the Marx merch, if you will, you can buy on eBay right now. And Marx is portrayed as, a kind of a confident, fun-loving, I told you so. I was right about capitalism. I'm here for the party. So there's this pop culture, beautiful nostalgia, it seems, just about Marx as this idea. So, I know a little bit about it. I've read the 10 planks and we'll talk about that. But, it just seems for young people who don't know anything about Marx, when they see it, they're seeing it as something very hip, very cool, very relevant, despite the fact that it's pictures of an old man. And Nikos here is a unique delegation, as you mentioned, Rucka, and that, Nikos, you studied Marx's ideas. You studied them for 5 years. So I want to toss it to you and just start by saying, what explains his pervasiveness over many, many years? And, where did Marx lead you as a young student pre-objectivism?
Yeah, so engaging with Marx, by the way more than 5 years, happens for two reasons. The first stage was that this was the normal thing to do. So the idea is the left is morally right. And in Greek culture, this is very embedded. Even the right basically says, yeah, okay, the left is morally right, but our means are better. So you people are taking it to extremes, and this leads to bloodbath. Or the social democrats are saying, okay, we can achieve your goals with different means. So, and if you understand this, then you say, okay, if the left is obviously right, then we need to understand the left better. We need to understand how the world works. And that's where you end up in Marx. But let me tell you something. Most of the people who follow the ideas of Marx have rarely read any Marx. And why I'm saying this, not to say I'm a cool kid because I've read Marx. The way Marx is presented today is a very simple one. It's that Marx talks about inequality. Marx talks about oppression. Therefore, Marx is, let's say, this social justice philosopher, which in some very simplistic way does make sense, but at the same time, it's far from the truth. I mean, Marx is way more than that. So Marx, you can use it as this evergreen surface that you can project everything you want. That's why you see in history how Marx has been used for example, for movements in the First World, labor movement in the UK, labor movement in the heart of capitalism, or what is considered the mixed economy with capitalistic elements. But also you can see Marx being the protagonist in terms of as a symbol in peasants' revolts, in anti-colonial revolts, because it has this message, this simplistic and easily understandable message that says, look, you're exploited by someone and you don't have the life that you could have had because of this exploitation. So rise up against your exploiter. And by the way, this is Marx with the help of Lenin. So Marx had the idea that it's capitalism at its essence. So actually, let me take one step back. What is Marx's main idea? And there's something very religious there. That's why it has appeal in all kinds of people. His main idea was, your life is not a whole, not a hole in the ground. WH. It's not a unity. You're alienated. There is this dualism in your life, and you are split from yourself. So if you don't feel good, and if life is not good, there's a reason for that. And what is this reason? That you live an alienated existence. And the only way to overcome this alienated existence is to become one with your true nature, with your true essence. But here's the catch. This true essence can only come through a communal experience. So already you see there's something very collectivistic in Marx. Only through the realization of you becoming one with the social, that's how you can be who you really are. By the way, if this sounds complicated, it's because it actually is. And it's because...
but isn't it just sacred? I mean, it's almost just like altruism in another, Nikos, I have to really just ask. I mean, we're getting a lot of talk on the chat about, you and your history with Marx, rising up against those who oppressed me. 8 years ago, when you were a Marxist, would you have hated a guy like me?
Actually, in a way, not, because I would see you as a sincere capitalist. So you would be the personification of evil, but also you'd be a very rare specimen. So it's not a coincidence that Marx has more hatred, and even more Lenin, with the social democrats rather than, let's say, with what we'd call the right. Because the idea is, again, these are the people who stand in the way for us to storm the Jonathan Hoenigs of this world. So when we reach the stage where we face Jonathan Hoenig, that's not a problem. We're gonna
put Rucka on that list of being stormed too. He's pretty high up as well. So don't just storm me. Make sure you storm Rucka as well.
Rucka would have to be stormed first because he's the intellectual. So the idea is that, look, if only people knew their real interest. So the idea is, and here we come to the main essence of Marx in terms of epistemology. The idea is that not only you are alienated from your essence, also you cannot know what is good for you. And that's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because that as long as you live in this capitalist society, the means of production, so basically the material world, is imposing things in your mind. Let me read you one line from the preface of Marx to the Capital. He says, the ideal is nothing but the material world reflected in the mind of a man and translated into forms of thought. So actually what you think is true is not really true. And that's not because, which is the simplistic explanation, because the capitalist brainwash you. It's because before you reach this other dimension, in a way where you become one with the social element and with the community, you cannot see the world. The worker cannot see the world, and even the capitalist cannot see the world. Why? Because ideas, in a way, are imposed on you from material reality. So notice the significant difference from objectivism, right? It's not that there is a real world out there and you have to make sense of it via the human method. Marx says, no, your mind is mostly passive. I cannot exactly explain you why, would say Marx, because he's never got really deep on what exactly happens. But somehow reality gets in your head. Therefore, it makes a huge difference whether you live in a society where this reality is that you work in the farm, or in a society where you work in the machine, or in a communist society of affluence. Whereas he says in the morning you're a fisherman, then you're hunting, then in the night you write property, then poetry. Then in some way this reality is going to be stuck in your head in a right way. And again, if this doesn't make sense, it's because it actually doesn't. It's not that. Yeah.
I want to quickly thank Fab06 for his contribution. Fab writes, admit it, the delay for our program today was just because Razi was pleading with Nikos not to sing the praises of Marx on this episode. Well, he didn't, Fab, he's not. And then also Christopher asks, was Marx a professor? What did he teach?
So Marx was not a professor. Marx worked in his life as a journalist, as a writer, as a political activist, and he, in a way, he was making a living out of his friend Friedrich Engels helping him. So when Marx was writing Das Kapital, for years he was stuck. He was spending all day in the in the big library in London. And Engels, interestingly, in a way, a capitalist himself, was helping Marx make a living. And during that time, Marx, we could say many things about the personal life of Marx and how his life had a bad impact on his family, but I don't want to go there because it's mostly important to criticize the ideas rather than getting the gossip of the life of man himself. And by the way, I don't know if we mentioned it, but it's his birthday today, which is why. And of course, he was trending on Twitter this morning, and it was all like, it's as you said, it's Marx is treated as if, he's this guy who's basically right, but some people got it wrong. For me, the most interesting discussion would be, did the people who actually tried to apply Marx, and I will use the example of Stalin because I know a lot about Stalin. Is it that the ideas were good, but somehow they applied them in the wrong way? Because this is what you hear from the left. So usually the idea is Marx is good. We teach him in universities. He's this social justice guy. But let's forget about these communists because these communist people didn't really get it and use violence. So another interesting question is, what is Marx's position on violence and what is Marx's position on politics and how history proceeds? And then, of course, you'll find yourself in the situation that you will see that, no, actually, in a way, Stalin was one of the good students of Marx, and Stalin was not a careerist. He was, in a way, and I use the term in the proper context, idealist, which means he was into these ideas. If you told Stalin, look, you have two options. You're going to get rich and go live in an island in the Pacific Ocean, or you're going to build communism with the risk of your life and killing millions of people. Say the latter. So that's what we have to understand about the application of Marxism in politics. These were people who took Marx seriously. They build societies based on the Marxist blueprint. They risk their lives on this, and they sacrifice lives of millions of others. So this idea that these things were not real communism or was not, this doesn't make sense to me. When you have people who spend their whole life understanding what is communism, and then trying to apply it, but then somehow this is not real communism, makes little sense.
Right. By the way, also thank you, Mary Aline, for the super chat earlier, and thank you, Jeff, for the Canadian super chat. I will just add, it wouldn't be an episode without me punching right. Like, you're right that the people on the left, or generally people, they turn Marx into this silly, fun pop culture icon. But I think also what you see is people turning Marx into the epitome of everything wrong with the world. Like, if we can just slay this one philosopher, get his influence out, then all will be well. But the truth is, to truly understand what's wrong with Marx's influence, you need to understand who is Marx, who influenced him, what are his premises that most of us still carry. And I think you definitely see Marxism everywhere now. Basically, what you have on the left is something that's not really Marxist. Maybe it has a few of the language, some of the vocabulary is Marxist, but it's much more modern and it's sort of advanced. It's different. It's later than Marxism. And what you see a lot on the right is basically they're trying to counter the left with Marxism. They're saying basically, I mean, not entirely Marxism, but like there's like more Marxism maybe on this reactionary right, the way that they're talking about how capitalism is good for raising our standard of living, but then we need to limit it and basically take over. And the way that the right, many people on the right are trying to galvanize around a nation and stuff like that is arguably more Marxist than what the left are up to. So interestingly enough, we really need to understand who Marx is. You mentioned, I think, Nikos, that the individual is only whole once he realizes his place in the group. Like that's something Marx brings. And what I took from the late great John Ridpath's lectures here on YouTube, they're available, about the roots of Marxism. Like he was like a child of Hegel, and Hegel saw the universe as like one big whole, and that the state, like the nation state, or just the state, is like the perfect realization of this godly consciousness here in reality. Obviously, I'm trying my best to explain something I barely understand, but so like there's no Marx without Hegel. So like we really need to understand, well, who is Hegel then, and where does Hegel come from? Who is his influence? Hint, it's someone who Rand earlier said is the most evil philosopher ever. And further, who is Kant? Where does he get some of his premises from? So we really do need to understand philosophy and take it seriously if we're going to slay this Marxist beast. It's not enough to just say, kill Marx and everything will be fine, as I think people are doing.
And here's the hot take of this episode. Marx today is way less influential in the left than most people would think. So, for example, Marx rarely speaks about income inequality, which is so big today in the left. So I challenge someone, put in one Word document all the writings of Marx and put Control F, income inequality, and tell me what's going to come up. So the difference of Marx with modern left is that Marx had, in a way, also a better understanding of capitalism. And I would say better understanding of capitalism.
Can I counter that, Nikos, really quickly, just to play devil's advocate, if you will? I mean, it's pretty common among the right to share the 10 planks of the Commons Manifesto, and I would say isn't a heavily progressive or graduated income tax, which isn't objected to at all these days. It's not like people on the so-called right are like, this is terrible, flat tax. They might say, so isn't that, an example of Marx, how today this idea of income inequality, I mean, that was all about Marx. He was doing that years ago.
So most people, particularly in the left, all they've read from Marx is the Commons Manifesto. Why? Because it's like this. Capital is like this, and it's three volumes of this.
Jesus.
So this is a relatively early, simple text that Marx wrote in terms of some particular political campaign. So it's not the essence of Marxism. So, but let me also add something.
I'm so sorry. I'll finish and then I'm gonna shut up. Let's break discussion now about different things to read. And we've talked about all these histories. I really recommend, and I'm sure you guys would as well, Dr. Peikoff's History of Philosophy audio course. It's great, really easy to listen to. He goes through all these big philosophers throughout time. You can get it on the ARI website for probably $5. Listen to that course and learn a lot, as I know we have.
Actually, I think it's free in ARI campus. So,
but
yeah, if you want to,
it's on YouTube as well, guys. We are at the top of the funnel here, looking to get people interested in objectivism, and then we'll direct you to some really great teachers if you're interested. Look it up on YouTube, guys.
So I don't know if you watched the other day, Yaron Brook made a breakdown, how it's called, of a video by Lawrence Southern, where she talks about how capitalism is bad. So we've reached the stage where Marx had a much better understanding of the progressive elements of capitalism as a historical moment, let's say, than today's conservatives. So 19th century Marx, in a way, is a better, quote, defender of capitalism than today's conservatives. And why I say defender, because if you see the opening of the Commons Manifesto, what Marx is saying is that capitalism is the best moment in history, basically till the next one. So he says it's the best system that has ever been, but because of, and here comes his metaphysics, of dialectics and contradiction and all this Hegelian baggage in Marx, through this system it's going to come, it's something which is even better, which is communism. Notice, by the way, that Marx does not ever really define what communism will look like, which is part of the issue of Marx and definitions. Actually, Marx doesn't even really define what a capitalist is, doesn't really define what alienation is, because for Marx, all these things are relationships. So Jonathan is not really a capitalist today, but maybe tomorrow he is. So for Marx, these elements are related to relations of power. By the way, there's something very postmodern in Marx as well. So that's why I'm saying Marx today is not so big in the left for two reasons. A, because the left has no plan on what to do after capitalism. And Marx didn't have a blueprint, but definitely had a plan. So the Commons Manifesto, particularly the second part, is a blueprint for revolution in a way. And Marx's Leninism is Marxism applied to politics on how to bring a revolution. So this is missing from the left today. So the left, usually the deepest they get is they read something from the manifesto and they're like, yeah, social justice, inequality, yeah, I'm a Marxist. Marx, particularly if you know how dogmatic, I don't want to say dogmatic, he wouldn't tolerate today's leftists. Let's put it this way. In many ways, he was way worse than them in terms of what would happen if his ideas would prevail, but he would have zero patience with today's leftists because they're so, let's say, anti-intellectual and they don't spend the time to really understand capitalism. So the three
volumes. But it's Nikos, it's not because they're individualistic. It's not like Marx would say, oh, I'm against today's leftists because they're too individualistic, is it?
No, he would say that they're not serious in a way, that they don't know what they're doing, they don't have a plan, and they don't have an alternative to capitalism. So in a way, the left today, the radical left, is basically a new kind of Keynesianism. It's more of the same. They think they're radicals, and the best they can say is, oh, tax the rich a bit more. So you don't have this vision of a different society based on some theory, which is Marxism. So again, we're doing two things today, or trying to do, because I think I failed completely because I jumped from one thing to the other. But the one thing is to say that Marx has a system. And actually, because it's a rationalistic system, which means that it's not tied to reality, but it's a very particular system where everything fits with something else. And it's a deep system in a way. It needs a lot of work to understand it. But at the same time, what we see today as the left has very, very little relationship to Marx himself. And Marx actually today would be vehemently opposed to the left, as he was in his days with most of what passed at that time as the left, particularly the utopian socialists of the time.
When the hippie revolution happened, I guess the late 60s and early 70s, Ayn Rand probably surprised a lot of people, as she surprised me many decades later when I was reading her work. She's calling the hippies like worse than the Marxists in a very important way. Like she said, I could have a better conversation with a Marxist and have more respect for their position and have a clearer understanding of what they're about than talking to one of these hippies, because the hippies are like, whatever, man. You can't even get them to engage. So the absolute rejection of logic and intellect and respect for any aspect of reality is the worst possible thing. There's no dealing with that with someone who is attempting to be an animal or even sub-animal, because an animal cares about what's true and respects reality more than hippies. So Ayn Rand, she was right on top of things, as she so often was when she said that. So Marx probably would say these postmoderns and all these people, they're just kind of making stuff up and they're silly. These are children. And
but in a way, he wouldn't be able really to accuse them, because again, how can a hippie control his mind? How can anyone control his mind? If reality, basically, if material reality somehow, so your mind is passively accepting it, then how can you blame someone? So in a way, the Marxian universe, it's very weird what its relationship with free will. So, for example, what is the role of the Revolutionary Party? It is to raise the proletariat to the level of a class consciousness where you can understand how history process and all that stuff. But then again, if you don't have free will, and if you don't have individual free will, then Marx has to do some mental acrobatics and saying, but it's not your individual, it's you come to a consciousness as a class. By the way, notice also the postmodernist element here. What do we hear today? That there's the black mind, the female mind, the white mind. Now, Marx doesn't really say exactly this, but this epistemological tribalism is there. That you don't come to truth via your individual mind, you come to truth via a collective mind, which of course, if someone could explain it to me how this can happen epistemologically, I would be very thankful to them. But that's the thing with Marx. He doesn't really care about epistemology. He throws these things, but he never elaborates on them. And that's something that's very infuriating when reading Marx.
And hence, so many people label leftists today as Marxists because they see some of those similarities, or maybe we would say some of the premises that Marx passed down. And what would Ayn Rand tell Marx if he saw these hippies? She would say, brother, you asked for it. By the way, thank you, Marilyn, for the super chat. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Stingy Student. Says Whitaker Chambers can't be left out on communism, and Americo-communist spy in America who leaked documents and defected and testified against communism. I'm not entirely sure the context other than Whitaker Chambers.
Let me tell you the context. I'm reading the Kotkin's 3-volume biography of Stalin. I'm in volume 2, and I'm at the section where we find out how American journalists would interview Stalin and then send the reports back. So even for journalists in top institutions, like the whitewashing of Stalin is unbelievable, and the whitewashing of Soviet Union. And Yaron has mentioned in many of his lectures, what's the film Mr. Jones? I haven't watched it, but reading it, and again, what happens at the same time is the forced collectivization. So it's not like you see the terror actually happening, you see the stage trials, and yet you have liberals, or how we call them today, American liberals, basically writing paeans for Stalin. And like, he's so misunderstood, but he's so warm, and he's anyway. And notice, these people had no actual like fear for their life. It's not like if they wouldn't send these reports, like they would be in trouble because they were Western citizens in the Soviet Union. So that's a good point. We can have a whole discussion about the so-called red decade, how is it called, in the 30s, and how many in the United States, non-communist, I'm not talking about Communist Party members, but what we call the liberals whitewashed the Soviet Union experiment. Now, Soviet Union and Marx, again, what's the link between them? That's a bigger discussion, but since it was mentioned, we should comment on it.
I want to just acknowledge we have a young objectivist from Madrid, Roquello, joining us on the super chat, and lots of active discussion there. We're really appreciating it all, and certainly the super chat as well. Take an opportunity, as we always remind you, to like the show, share the show, most importantly, become a supporter, a monthly supporter of the Ayn Rand Institute. Europe. What are we called again? Wait, the Ayn Rand Center UK, excuse me, Ayn Rand Center UK. Support us, keep the lights on. I just want to quickly make a mention, you know, Nikos, when were you a card-carrying Marxist? I mean, we're talking about 6 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
So wait, there are two periods. The one is when I'm active in the Greek Communist Party, which is till 2008. And the other period is where I'm getting serious in really understanding this, but from the intellectual point of view, which is around 2010 to 2012. And this is when actually I depart, because I'm not, when I dive deep into it, it doesn't make sense. And there are questions that no one can answer, and that's the beginning of the end for me.
Well, we need to wrap up, and I'll just say it's, you know, Rucka, you've talked about some of your transformation over the years, and Nikos, yours to me is, you know, equally inspiring and amazing how powerful ideas are. And I would have been interested to know you then, but I'm so great to know you now and to see what you've
let me one
how
thing
you've
before
made
we
your
wrap
life.
up. This is not a beautiful story, first and foremost. This is a story of why did I make so many things wrong when I was a kid, and why I was such a second-hander. So for me, that's where the start of the story, and then hopefully it has a happy end. But for me, the start is why these mistakes earlier. But anyway.
Yeah, you know, when I read Ayn Rand's novels, so many people talk about how much it spoke to them. And for me, the villains were very powerful. Toohey in The Fountainhead, and a lot of the villains in Atlas Shrugged, to the extent that the ones in Atlas, they're not just greedy for material things. They are at war with reality. That is something Rand points out via her characters. And I realize this has been me. It's not just that I want to seize the loot of the booty of the rich. It's I don't want to live life on life's terms, and I really need to decide, like, I need to be selfish if I really want to have a good life. So Albert Einstein famously said something like, our technology has surpassed our humanity. And I think when you look at the Industrial Revolution, and then you look at what was happening in philosophy, like, things were advancing very quickly and wonderfully in the technological side, but philosophically, it's almost like it was working backwards or just complicating things in a terrible way, making a mess of things. And someone like Marx, you could see as like looking at all this wonder around him and just saying, like, you know, my consciousness says it all belongs to me, or I can be this, a fisherman in the morning and a factory worker at night. Like, just, I mean, philosophy is serious business, folks. You know, look at the world. Look at all the millions of dead people in the name of communism and via Marxist philosophy. I mean, there are real life consequences. So philosophy can be your best friend or your worst enemy. It is a tool, after all. It is a form of technology, after all. So technology can be used for destruction or to build. Which will it be? Thank you for joining us today. We're going to jump over to Clubhouse. Thank you all for the super chats. We're going to get to eat tonight. Speaking of being alienated in the capitalist world, please consider becoming an Ayn Rand Center UK member to learn a lot more in depth and a lot more stuff. Also, join us on Clubhouse here momentarily. Coming up at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 Eastern on this channel, Don Watkins and James Valiant will discuss Ayn Rand's essay, Apollo and Dionysus. Nikos obviously can't tell.
Dionysos, it's a Greek god. I can pronounce it properly.
Since you're Greek, you can. And then at 9 p.m. UK time, which is 4 Eastern on Radio Ragnar, that's our Clubhouse club, Flirting with Reason, the hot new show, I should say, with Nikos and Maria discussing the topic, should men learn game? What do you think? We want to know what you think. Join us there. And we're jumping over to Clubhouse right now, and we'll be back here tomorrow for the Daily Objective tomorrow. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Nikos. And goodbye.